Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our August 2021 WatchGuard Update Webinar. This is Madison Slater, your tour guide for the month through the world of WatchGuard. Let's go ahead and get started. As always, just a couple of reminders. Your lines are all on mute automatically, so we all have a nice quiet experience. So if you've got any background noise, don't worry about it. We can't hear you. This webinar is being recorded. You will be able to play this back later on our website. The chat window is located on the right side of your screen, and all questions are welcome and will be answered at the end. We love questions, so make sure you're sending those over throughout the course of the webinar. We will be happy to answer those as we get to the end of it. So to talk about what we've got going on today, we're going to talk about our current firmware options. We have some new releases, so we want to make sure that you are aware of those. We're going to talk about our new beta. We talked about this a little bit last month, but AuthPoint Geofencing Policies. Then we're going to talk about a little bit more of a general topic, cyber insurance and MFA. This is something that's been coming up a lot, so we want to make sure you understand why we've been talking about MFA so much. And then we're going to talk about our demo, which is rolling back firewall firmware. Hopefully not something you ever need to do, but a good thing to know how to do in the event that ever pops up. And then, of course, we will let you know about all of our upcoming training here in the wide world of WatchGuard. All right, device firmware. So we do have new firmware releases. WatchGuard has been breaking down their firmware by model. So our latest release for our XTM 800, 1500, 2500 series and XTMV is 12.1.3 Update 6. This was released on August 2nd. We do recommend that version. If you are still running on one of the XTM devices, they are stopped at 12.1.3. These updates are simply bug fixes. So get that installed if you still have those XTM devices. Friendly reminder, if you still have XTM, you are not getting the latest and greatest firmware because they are stopped at 12.1.3. So we would highly recommend that you consider upgrading those boxes. For our Firebox T10, T15, T30, T35, T50, M200, M300, we have a new release of 12.5.8, released 8.2. Now this is still a relatively new firmware. At this point, we are still recommending 12.5.7 Update 3. And then our Firebox T20, T40, T55, etc. Some of our bigger M series. I won't read all of those to you guys. I think you are all probably more than capable of reading those yourselves. New release is 12.7.1, also released 8.2. Now we are still recommending 12.7 Update 1. Our general practice with any WatchGuard firmware, wait till we get that first update. That is going to be patches or fixes for that new release. We have heard of a couple of issues with 12.7.1, so that's part of the reason that we are still sticking with 12.7 Update 1. We'll definitely make sure to let you all know once we recommend that new update. We try to send out a service alerts here for any of you that are under our managed firewall services. We go ahead and take care of those for you. For anyone not under our managed firewall services, we will make sure to send out an alert when we feel that the new release is up to par and you should go ahead and update. And as always, if you ever need assistance, we're happy to help get that firmware updated for you. All right, so I want to talk about a new beta. Again, we touched on this a little bit last month. I want to touch on this again. I personally am really excited about this new feature. This is a new feature in AuthPoint called geofencing. So one of the things that AuthPoint has been doing is working through their risk framework, meaning that they are building in new functionality to add additional security. The whole name of the game with MFA is security. It's the whole reason we do it. So they started by giving us network locations, meaning that you can set up your policies in your AuthPoint to operate in a particular way based off of where the user is connecting from. So for example, if you don't want your users to have to go through MFA when they are in the office, then you can use network locations. In conjunction with that, you can also build time schedules in. Time schedules give you the ability to say when those policies are in effect. So depending on the time of day, you can even set it where, no, we don't want you to log in at all because we don't operate at 3 in the morning. So that could be indicative of someone in another part of the world trying to hack an account. One of the new betas now is geofencing, and this is going to be policies based off of countries. So when you are setting up your policy object, you will create a geofencing policy where you can add the countries that will be part of the policy. You can determine if GPS location will be required. So you're getting some added functionality there. Now, I am in particular excited about this use of GPS because that's going to give us better precision with the policy, knowing exactly where they are. One of the reasons that's important is because people can use VPNs to route themselves through other countries, where if we are requiring GPS as part of that, it makes it a little bit more foolproof. So definitely some exciting features. If I am understanding WatchGuard's time frame correctly, they are thinking that this will be available for beta in September. So that is coming up. Somehow it is already September almost. With most of the betas, when we're talking about AuthPoint, you can actually just go into your AuthPoint portal and turn that on. When we're talking about like firmware betas for your firewalls, that's a whole separate program that you're logging into, buying into the beta, grabbing the files that you need. But typically these betas that they've been releasing through the cloud, it's a section inside of that where you can check that box, turn it on. So I know I'm really excited about this. WatchGuard has been doing a great job with AuthPoint, adding in new functionality, adding in new features. We rely on AuthPoint a lot, so it's definitely something that I love seeing, these new capabilities. Now, one of the reasons, we're still talking about WatchGuard, but specifically I want to explain why we hit on AuthPoint so much. Yes, we like the product. Now, for any of you that have worked closely with us, I want you to know that we are, at our core, a security company. We focus on cybersecurity, and we put our vendors that we are recommending through the ringer. We test things here internally. We put ourselves through it before we ever recommend it. We will not recommend a product that we do not feel is up to par. But we recommend Offpoint a lot. Specifically, we recommend MFA. Now, the reason that MFA has become so needed and so necessary is because of insurance. When you are dealing with a cyber insurance policy, the vast majority of them at this point are saying, if you don't have MFA, you don't get our insurance. The reason for that is that they want you doing at least some sort of minimum to protect yourself. MFA is becoming a very, very, very common requirement. Now, we look at MFA in three primary places. VPN access, if we're specifically talking about our firewall. Email access. We did a whole webinar a couple of weeks ago about using MFA on your Microsoft 365. It's the #1 place that people are getting hit. But also protecting access into your systems, into your file servers, into your computers, things like that. MFA is becoming a necessity. So we want you to get it implemented. Not because we're trying to sell you anything extra, but because you're going to have to at some point. And honestly, if you don't have it, it's only a matter of time before you get hit. So the reason that has been a big topic for us over the last couple of months, not only is AuthPoint releasing new functionality, but because of this. And the two are directly related. AuthPoint is releasing new functionality because you're going to have MFA. So it might as well be able to do a lot of cool stuff. So just something to be aware of there. We will continue to talk about it because they're going to continue to push new features out, which makes that service even better. If MFA is something that you are not currently implementing, and you've been joining these webinars, you see us talking about AuthPoint, you want to see what all the fuss is about in action, we are happy to do demos of that just so you can see it. We use it here. I use our own environment to demo so you can see exactly what it looks like. It's not a lab setup or anything like that. But again, I just want to make it clear why we are talking about AuthPoint so much. It's because it is becoming a standard. And if you're not implementing it today, you need to be. All right, so WatchGuard was a little light on updates this month. This happens, and there's a variety of reasons. So I always like to take time when that is happening to make sure that you guys have a demo that really rings home. Hopefully, this is something that you never have to worry about. But let's face it, anytime we're upgrading firmware, there's a possibility that that firmware is not going to operate the way that we want to. So one of the things that I think is a very important skill for you to know how to do is to roll back firmware. Again, hopefully this is not something that you're ever going to have to do. I'm going to teach you how to do it, and then you never have to implement it. But just in case, I want to make sure that you're aware of it. So when you're rolling back firmware, what you are doing is reinstalling an older version of that firmware. Sounds easy enough. However, when you do that, you have to have a backup. Otherwise, it factory resets your firewall, which is not fun for anybody, because at that point you have your fingers and toes crossed that you have a config file sitting around somewhere that you can load back into that device. So when we're talking about firmware rollbacks, the big thing that I want you to understand is that you need to be taking backups of your device. You need to be doing that. Now, backups on the firewall have changed pretty significantly over the last several years. It used to be that when you took a backup of your firewall, you had to store it somewhere and you had to have this encryption key. And man, you better hope that you documented that somewhere, otherwise the backup was useless. One of the things that WatchGuard changed with their new hardware is that the backup gets stored directly on the firewall, which makes it a lot easier for us to get access to it. Now, there's a few key reasons just for backups in general of why you would want to take them. The big one being firmware rollback. But backups are basically a snapshot of the firewall. So when you go into your firewall, if you're accessing it through System Manager and you save a copy of that config, you go to File, Save as File, or you are making a change and it's saving that configuration. All that is the XML, meaning that it's a big portion. It's your policies, it's your services, it's your network configuration, it's your VPN configuration. But that does not store passwords. It does not store certificates. It is just the config. So if you wipe a firewall and you load that back in, sure, you've got your config back, but again, no passwords, no certificates, anything that was stored on the box itself. So this is where the backup comes in. Now, it also used to be that the backup, when you would save this, it was a snapshot including the firmware. They don't do that anymore, but it actually makes it a little bit easier of a process. And I'll show you here in just a second what I'm talking about. Now, other reasons that we always recommend taking a backup is, let's say you're getting ready to do a massive overhaul of your firewall. Take a backup just to be safe. I am all about caution when it comes to making firewall changes and making sure that I've got copies of that stored somewhere. Now, a backup is specific to that hardware. You cannot take the backup from one firewall and restore that on another firewall. Does not work, because then it's trying to pull in the licensing, which is attached to the feature key, which is attached to the serial number. Doesn't work. Backups are only restored on that box itself. When you do a firmware upgrade, it should automatically do a backup as part of that process. But I'm a little bit of a hesitant person when it comes to that, so I'm also going to show you how to do manual backups. Even if I know it's going to take a backup as part of the process, anytime we do firmware upgrades, I have the team take a manual backup just in case. So that's our step one, is that we go into our firewall, and let me maximize this a little bit so we can see it a little easier. All right, so I'm in Policy Manager. You can do this through web interface as well. I just am a Policy Manager person. So I am going to go under File, Backup and Restore. You're going to need your admin password. Now, you can see where I had created a backup earlier today, but I can easily say Create. I can name it. It gives it its own initial name. I can name it myself. Click OK. And that is now stored right here on the firewall. So if I want to, I can export this. If I want to store a copy of this somewhere else, perfectly fine. Once I hit export, it's going to ask me for my encryption key. Make sure you document that. And then it's going to ask me where I want to save it. Now, this used to be the only process, was exporting it. I personally have found that I usually just keep it on the firewall, but if you want to make sure that you've got a redundant copy, please feel free to export that out. So that's step number one. All right, so then we would go through the process So let's say we've gone through the process, we've upgraded our firewall. So let me jump over to this one. This one is my student one. I'm running on 12.7.1, latest and greatest firmware. I realize that this firmware is causing issues. I'm running into problems with it. So I am trying to work through those, but I'm reaching a point where I'm getting someone's breathing down my neck saying, you've got to put this back the way that it was. So I am now looking at a rollback. Now I did, when I upgraded this, if I go into my backup and restore, I had taken a backup manually, but it also, again, creates an auto backup, is supposed to, at least, when you do a firmware upgrade. Now, I say supposed to. I have seen, it's been a while, but I saw a firewall one time not do the automatic backup, which is why I'm so particular about creating my own. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice is when you take a backup, it's telling you what firmware that backup is stored, or what firmware that backup is running on. If you want to restore a backup, you're going to have to roll back to that particular firmware. Now, this particular firmware is 12.7 update 1, so I'm going to have to roll back to that particular version. I can't restore a backup from anything else. So I'm at a point, my boss is saying, you've got to get this back to the way it was. We're down, or we're having all these issues. So what I need to do is I need to go to the WatchGuard website. I pick my firewall. Now this is, of course, giving me the latest revision. So you're going to scroll down to the bottom. You can say previous software, and this is where you get access to that older firmware. Again, you need to make sure that you're pulling the exact same version that that backup is running on. Now, how do we figure out? Because WatchGuard does this thing where they call it 12.7 update 1, but when you're looking at the firewall itself, it doesn't say that. They base it off of build numbers, which can be a little confusing, a little hard to track down. So to confirm, one of the things that you can do, I can say, I'm pretty sure this was 12.7 update 1. If you go into the release notes of that, it will tell you the build numbers. So 12.7 update 1 is 640.389. And I'm just going to compare that to the backup, 640.389. Perfect. Okay, so if I restore back to 12.7 update 1, which is what I was running before, I have a backup that I'm going to be able to pull back in. So at this point, you would download the firmware, just like you're doing a new firmware upgrade. I'm just downloading that older version. So I'm downloading that 12.7 update 1. Download it, install it, which I've already done. So I'm going to say File, Upgrade, even though I'm downgrading. Now what it's going to do is it's going to pull the most recent version that you have installed on that computer. So you can simply click Browse, and then we're going to navigate backwards to find that 12.7 update 1. You can also get around this by uninstalling 12.7.1. So the latest you would have is 12.7 update 1. So if I just go back, here's my 12.7, and then I'm going to dive down into that, my Firebox V. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going back to 12.7. There's my build number, so I click OK. Now, it's still using the terminology upgrading, even though I'm downgrading. So I'm going to click Yes. And now it's saying, oh, wait, this is an older version. And it's immediately going to ask me, what firmware version or what backup am I rolling back to? These are both the exact same. They were taken, honestly, within minutes of each other, because one I did manually, the other it did when I did the automatic update, or when it did it automatically when I did the update. So I'm just going to pick that one. And at this point, the upgrade is going to run like normal. And then once that Firebox comes back online, I should no longer see 12.7. I will see I will no longer see 12.7.1. I will see 12.7 with the correct build number of 12.7 update 1. So again, hopefully something that you never have to worry about, but let's face it, it is always a possibility. Be particular about taking those backups. Make sure that you've got those backups in place. I always do a manual backup before I do a firmware upgrade. Okay, now it's telling me that it was downgraded. And if I go in and let's refresh this, this firewall is still in the process of rebooting, so it's probably going to tell me that this is down. But once that firewall eventually comes back online, then it will show me that I am back on that 12.7. So it does still reboot just like a regular firmware upgrade. You guys saw it. The process was pretty similar. It did ask me what backup, so then you just have to make sure, yep, 12.7, and there's my build number. So I'm back on the older firmware. Hopefully not something you ever have to run into, but in the event that you do, process is pretty straightforward. Just make sure you're taking your backups. All right. If you are interested in any official WatchGuard training, so we love bringing these demos to you once a month. Obviously, that is no substitute for actual hands-on week-long training. So we've got some good training sessions coming up. We're shifting around some of our training places a little bit. So if you're wanting to get out of the office, we have an Atlanta class coming up September 13th. We also offer all of our classes virtually. So if you can't get out of the office, you want to attend virtually, exact same experience. You're just not sitting in the same room, but same equipment, same instructor. It's just in a different part of the country. We have a Phoenix class coming up at the beginning of October. So if you are on more West Coast time, Charlotte, October 25th. So you can come see us here in person at JSCM. We actually hold those classes here in our office. Phoenix again in November, and then back to Charlotte at the beginning of December. We also are happy to offer custom on-site training classes. So if you have a lot of people in your office that you need to get trained all at once, it's not feasible to get them all out of the office, we are happy to come to you. We've actually got a custom on-site class coming up in the middle of September that we're really excited about. So always an option there for you. All right, and now we will open it up to questions. If you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to send those over and we will get those answered for you. So I'll give everybody a minute to send those in if you had anything you wanted to ask. Good question. Difference between backup of the firewall versus backup of the config. So backup of the config, that's what is just the XML. So backup of the config, and what we mean by this is, let me get that back up. You go into your firewall, you say File, Save as File. You can save a copy of this configuration. That does not include your passwords to your firewall. Doesn't include any certificates that are stored on the device. It is just the configuration. Now, that file you can use if you need to upload that into a new device. So that's what you would need. Let's say you have a hardware failure, your device dies, you've gotten an RMA, you can't take the backup because backup is specific to hardware. This config file is what you would need to move over for that. So both of them are important just for different reasons. I always make sure that I have a copy of each one. All right, doesn't look like we have any other questions. If at any point you have a question that comes up, please feel free to reach out to me, reach out to your account manager here at JSCM, and we will point you in the right direction, get you in touch with someone. If you need technical assistance, we are happy to help in that capacity as well. Thank you all for your time this month. We appreciate it, and we will see you in September with more WatchGuard news. Thanks. Have a good afternoon.